Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at an important dynamic that unfortunately has impacted Pakistan for quite some time now, and there are numerous, of course, security challenges that exist within the country. But the kind of spike in terrorist activities that we've seen first after the US troop withdrawal in Afghanistan, and then after the end of the ceasefire by the TTP in November last year, there is, of course, a battle that has been fought at the front of the issue of terrorism in Pakistan, something that of course Pakistan has been dealing with for such a long time now, and in just 2023 alone, in the first half of this year, we've seen a 79% increase in terrorist activities in the country, according to a report published by a think tank. And this is important, especially in terms of how it impacts different regions, particularly Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, that has been impacted the most. And it's important when we also take a look at the last 48 hours in which 4 attacks have happened in the province, and just a recent one just last night where 8 terrorists tried to attack a checkpost that was thwarted by the police, and it was done so because there was already high alert issued in the region. But of course, this is the 4th such attack in the past 48 hours alone, and so this points to the kind of issues and threats that the entire country faces, but of course certain areas face the most, and the kind of response that is required. We also know, of course, that there has been a stern warning coming from the Pakistan's top military establishment with reference to the role that the Afghan Taliban regime need to play in this regard, and how they need to ensure that their soil is not used against any other territory. And this is important, especially in terms of the kind of safe havens that have been provided to particularly the TTP, and then how in recent attacks we have seen that the way that the latest weaponry was acquired by the TTP was made possible because of the kind of support that exists from within Afghanistan. But again, unfortunately, we've seen a lack of any sort of real action that can be taken from the Afghan Taliban regime towards this front, and so Pakistan has said that there will be a befitting response, and Pakistan, of course, will not tolerate any spike in terrorist activities in the country. But then there are numerous challenges that still remain as to how we're going to deal with the threat of extremism, and of course these groups such as the TTP within the country, of course with reference to cross-border issues as well, and then how we're going to prevent safe havens from existing in countries like Afghanistan, and the kind of response that Pakistan needs to make at the domestic front and also at the international level to put forward along with this fight. So we're going to talk about all of this in our show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. We've also been joined in our studios by Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, Member Planning Commission. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiaq, for being a part of the show. And we've also been joined online by Director Research IPRI, Brigadier Retired Mr. Raashid Wali Janjua, who's joined us online. Thank you very much, Janjua Saab, for also joining us in the discussion. And let me first start off with you, because I want to understand, of course, when we talk about the kind of response that is needed to the threats that exist, it's important to understand how exactly will that translate into action from our end. And we'll explore that further as we continue the discussion. But let's take a look at the small package as to what has unfolded in Pakistan with regards to this issue.
On November 28, 2022, TTP called off a ceasefire agreement it had reached with the government in June 2021. After this unilateral end to the ceasefire, the country witnessed a surge in terrorist attacks, mostly in the western parts of Pakistan, the province of KPK and Balochistan. Terrorists spread fear through acts of violence to achieve their objectives. The TTP demands the reversal of merger of FATA region with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the withdrawal of security forces from the area so that it can rule there. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has witnessed 665 terrorist attacks this year, a nearly 59% increase from 2022. The province has endured 4 terrorist attacks in the past 48 hours alone. The most recent assault at the Raashid police outpost in the Peshawar-Sarband area by 8 terrorists was repulsed. Another attack targeted a compound focused in Bara Bazar in Khyber district by 2 suicide bombers, which resulted in a total of 14 casualties, including civilians and law enforcement personnel. On April 18, a suicide bomb blast took place near the security forces vehicle in Peshawar's Hayatabad area. At least 10 people, including 7 law enforcers, sustained injuries in the blast. The government of Pakistan believes that the sanctuaries and freedom of action enjoyed by the TTP terrorists and other banned organizations in Afghanistan have contributed to the recent surge. Since the Taliban's return to power in August 2021, Pakistan has seen an increase in terrorist assaults and has urged the interim leaders to take serious action against terrorists, notably the TTP, who are responsible for cross-border attacks.
Well, of course, we understand what the situation is in Pakistan and particularly in KP, but the important question, of course, remains as to what needs to be the decision as the way forward and how we will be responding to this issue, both within the country and then, of course, with reference to the Afghan Taliban regime as well. Janjua Saab, the way forward, of course, is pretty clear in terms of the rhetoric that we have seen coming in from the top leadership of the military and how time and again both the ruling elite and the military have reiterated that there would be zero tolerance with regards to terrorism in the country. But I want to understand that as we, of course, stand at this point today in July 2023, the ceasefire with the TTP was ended back in November last year. And in all of these months, we've seen a huge number of terrorist activities within the country. And at the same time, of course, the kind of safe havens that exist within Afghanistan for the TTP. And so it's important for us to understand then that since the ceasefire ended and the way that we have progressed forward, calling it a zero tolerance policy, what sort of action is then needed to also ensure that that zero tolerance policy in fact also ensures that there is an impact on the number and frequency of terrorist activities?
Thank you, Sunil. I think it's going to be a long, hard slog. There are no easy solutions, and there are no silver bullets. It's going to be a very long, hard, saddleless counter-terrorism and counter-insurgency operations combined, and it's going to take the whole of the nation approach now. The armed forces part, they are already deployed, and they have started conducting the counter-insurgency and counter-terrorism operations, and FC is also there. The law enforcement agencies like police and the counter-terrorism apparatus of police is also fully bearing the brunt of this full-blown wave of terrorism. So much so that in May alone there were about 70 attacks. Some of them go unreported, and only those get traction on media in which there are casualties. But there are 90% of those cases in which the attempts are foiled are never reported. So on the part of law enforcement agencies, I think they are fully into that, and the diplomatic efforts are also afoot. We have just seen our special representative on Afghanistan, Ambassador Asif Durrani. He has had a visit, and he has sensitized the Taliban about the concerns of Pakistan. And there are positive engagements between Taliban regime and Pakistan. But despite that, we've been discussing these points in the past as well, that Afghan Taliban regime is of the opinion that they will facilitate in all possible manner to rein in the TTP activities which relate to violence, but they will stop short of actually evicting them because they have that ideological affinity with them. The TTP has taken oath of fealty at the hands of Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada, who is the political and the spiritual head of Afghan Taliban regime. But there is also a fatwa by Hibatullah.
Are they only stopping short of eviction, and the rest is being done, or do you think that there is more that can be done?
Obviously, there's more that can be done. And there are relocation plans also, which were, articulated in the past as well, but have not been put into practice as yet. And as of now, there are, camps in Host, and there is presence all along, Host, Paktika. Even now, there are news of some Taliban TTP presence in the Zabul province also, which borders our Pakhtun belt of Balochistan. So I think more needs to be done by Afghan Taliban regime, but I personally feel that in their present incapacity to deal with these issues in the presence of ISKP threat and Al Qaeda threat, which are also attacking, Taliban assets. One of their governors was assassinated, and so there's an internal struggle also going on. Taliban regime is diplomatically isolated. Economically, they are going through straitened circumstances. So they are not fully in that kind of control. We will have to actually fight our battle ourselves inside our territory, and whatever is happening inside our borders, we should take care of that. We should sanitize our territory. We should take care of the resurgence of these terrorist cells and our counter-terrorism apparatus. It needs to be now re-energized, and along with that, the counter-extremist measures, those will also have to be ramped up.
Right. When we talk about all of these issues, Dr. Ishtiaq, I want to understand when we say sensitizing the Afghan Taliban, I want to understand if that is really the node on which we need to explore further in terms of what needs to be done. Is there an actual lack of sensitivity that really is the problem here, and that once that happens, that we will move towards action from the Afghan Taliban? Because then we of course also talk about capacity or will, but which one is it? What's the real issue here in terms of what we need from them, and will our efforts towards sensitizing actually result to something?
Well, Sana, first of all, I think we need to continue the constructive engagement at multiple levels with the Afghan Taliban regime. There should not be any doubt about it, and Pakistan has been doing not just with the current regime, but also successive Afghan governments, even if they were hostile towards us. Second, the problem that we are dealing with, it has quite a long background, and immediate is we are dealing with basically 20 years of war on terror, the implications that are regional, and particularly because we have the longest border with Afghanistan, and there are ethnic, historical, religious overlappings here. So therefore implications, if there is one country in the region which will continue to face implications of Afghan instability, Afghan warfare, and what has followed after a 20-year battle in Afghanistan. So first of all, it is important to continue diplomacy, and diplomacy with utmost seriousness, because if you compare the comparison of terrorist attacks, say in 2021, after August 15, when the Americans departed, then during 2022, and the initial half year this year, there have been moments when there is significant decline. In my own opinion, I think the surge in attacks by TTP in the past 2 weeks, so one noticeable difference is that in a couple of attacks they have been thwarted by the security agencies. We have prevented major casualties in many other attacks as well. So there has been a resurgence of attacks in the past 2 weeks, and in my own humble opinion, it signifies some kind of a desperation on the part of TTP, because what has taken place in the previous couple of months is that we have increased our counter-terrorism department's presence in the districts, of the merged districts of the ex-FATA region. So it is not limited to a few places. We have gone down to the grassroots level. And I think ultimately the success might not be in the overall counterinsurgency operation, because we are not dealing with currently an insurgent movement. We are dealing with individualistic attacks, groups or individuals, suicide bombers selecting some targets, especially the security law enforcement agencies, and then they carry out their attacks. So what we need to focus on is basically intelligence-based operations, greater understanding of the ground, and as you said in the opening remarks, zero tolerance of such activities on our soil.
Absolutely. Farrukh, the situation also, of course, points us towards looking inwards and understanding what it is that needs to be also upgraded in our own response, and especially following the kind of attacks that have taken place within KP. I want to understand that the way that the security personnel responds and are the first responders is, of course, also in terms of the police personnel that existed, especially a checkpost as was targeted just yesterday. And so how is it that moving forward, whatever sort of plan of action that exists with in a larger context and in a larger sense with organizations as GTP, they also trickle down in terms of us strengthening and equipping the police force, which actually responds to these threats initially?
Right, Sana, and I think that it is a very important question. I think that the capacity building of our law enforcement, particularly police, and levies and similar kind of bodies, right? They have been actually going on for quite some time. We have been fighting this war for 20 years. But this time there has been a very, well orchestrated attack on police forces particularly. And if you have seen that in some cases when the bodies were found, especially there were cases of cops being beheaded, and in their pockets of the bodies, you would find letters where it was declared that they are traitors to the cause of Pakistan or TTP's cause, and that's why they are being punished, right? So similar kind of attacks have continued, and capacity building is there. But remember, when you are adjacent to another country that has given all sanctuaries to your worst enemy possible, and then they don't even think that those methods are wrong, because this is how exactly Afghan Taliban actually came to power. They kept on using similar kind of tactics. So what do you expect? We have been actually building this fence. Of course, every time we try to actually finish it, Afghan forces or some elements from Afghanistan start attacking it, and our soldiers are martyred also. So with that kind of a situation, it sort of takes me back to the days when Afghan Taliban were taking over in Kabul. They hadn't. I mean, I'm talking about 2 years ago, or more or less exactly 2 years ago, because it happened in August. At that time, Brigadier Janjua used to be participant of my program as well, and he will remember that my biggest concern at that time was that the day Afghan Taliban take over, there will be 2 or 3 big problems. One, there won't be any alternative force in Afghanistan that can actually put pressure on the incumbent, like it used to be the case under Ashraf Ghani's government. The second thing is that Afghan Taliban have never, and this goes as far back as 2001-2, when Lashkar-e-Jhangvi's terrorists were hiding in Afghanistan, and our government at that time actually sent some representative, 2000 and 2001, that at least hand them over. And Afghan Taliban refused to admit that those people we had intelligence of, that they're like Basra and others who were sitting in Kabul, that they actually existed in Kabul or Afghanistan at all. So my humble submission at that time was that we won't get any, strategic depth in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan's Taliban will get strategic depth in Pakistan via TTP. And this is exactly what is happening, Sana, right now. So what is the story now? When former Prime Minister was in power, at that time a deal was cut with TTP because the former Prime Minister was a fanboy of Afghan Taliban, and at that time he actually said that Afghanistan has cast away the shackles of slavery. At that time he cut these deals and people were brought back, and because those people were admitted in Pakistan, they have been actually wreaking havoc, and they are being supported by the other side. So what exactly happens now? When you talk to Afghan Taliban, they say that we are ready to relocate them away from the borders, but for that we need money. right? So it is essentially another way of extortion. You hand over that money and you don't know what exactly will happen afterwards, whether they will deliver on their promise. If they have actually not fulfilled their Doha promises, why would they do it now? And finally, I don't buy this whole story that Afghan Taliban keep on struggling and they haven't got money. Their currency is more stable than ours. Their economy continues to actually get better every day. Our keeps on suffering, and one of the reasons why ours is in shambles and theirs is not is constant smuggling from Pakistan of dollars and other food items that are critical there. They keep on doing it, and of course it continues. With that kind of a situation, Sana, the tail is now wagging the dog. So what exactly do we do now? There has to be there are some levers that Pakistan keeps on using. But I think that if you go to Ajit Doval's that long speech before Narendra Modi actually took over about defensive offense at Shastra University, he actually said that let Taliban sort out Pakistan, then we'll know how to deal with them. They are not our enemies, Pakistan is. So if you think about that kind of situation, I think something else is going on. Your enemies are laughing and you are actually sitting in a morose state of mind. So we'll have to find a way to actually correct all this.
Right. Janjua Saab, the situation, especially when we talk about the cross-border mechanisms that need to be curtailed, is also an important one. And unfortunately, the border management seems to be an issue that always springs up, even though we've been talking about it for so long. And yet, of course, there is still a lot of issues with us moving forward with this. What sort of challenges do you think are there that are perhaps inevitable in the way forward in terms of the capacities of both Pakistan and Afghanistan? And do you think that most of the challenges that we currently face are due to issues such as the terrain, or are because of challenges that exist in terms of the way the border is actually managed?
I think our challenges are a consequence of a mix of the factors. And the most important is, as long as Afghanistan remains destabilized, we should expect some kind of trouble on our border regions. And the question of managing a porous border of 2,600 kilometers, which has been fenced to a large extent, but remember there are 5 crossing points, and on those crossing points, because of various compulsions and reasons, we allow entry. And we need to do a better job of our border management. Still around 30,000 Afghans, they daily come to Pakistan. And there is a medical tourism also. There are refugees who are with us, 7 lakh of them who have just come after the Taliban takeover. They also have been given cards by us to go back. So there's a back and forth movement going on, and in the garb of those regular movements, there are many terrorists who are pushed through. So we need to do a better job of managing the border crossings, but at the same time, we need to be very clear about one thing, that we cannot cede this diplomatic advantages to the very forces that are out to keep Afghanistan pot on the boil. We need to ease that trade regime also, and we should ensure that this initiative is not handed over to the other countries, because this is one of the leverages that Pakistan has, the Afghan transit trade, and then their dependence on our ports. So those leverages should be fully utilized to exercise diplomatic pressure on Taliban regime, and the positive engagement is the key. And we should try and extract the maximum from the Taliban leadership, and we should keep on emphasizing upon them the need to dissuade and to control their own territory, and at the same time our own border management and our counter-terrorism and counter-insurgency operations should gain maximum traction. there is a phase that is called clear, hold, and build. We have been clearing areas, we have been holding areas, we have been building these, but as soon as we come back, there is a recrudescence of violence. Why? Because we have not established the civil administration, we have not established a legal system, we have not established a normal governance structure in those areas which are still they do not have a very stable governance apparatus, and because of that, the population and the tribes, they are also disaffected. So the civil administration, the strengthening of the civil administration, the ability of the civilian apparatus of governance as it was pre-TTP period and rather pre-Taliban period, I think we need to bring back that kind of governance structure, and we should also have a look on how these post-merger stabilization and development initiatives have taken hold. Have those areas been fully developed? Are there any livelihood opportunities there? What is the state of the tribes? Now, we know that there are 4,000 to 5,000 Taliban militants who are in Afghanistan, but there are also 50 to 55,000 family members, old people, children and their families, those who have got nothing to do with the militancy. They are also there. So some of them want to come back. How would we ensure that they come back and they do not again act as the sanctuaries and support system for the terrorists? Then there was a peace parleys, and there was a criticism that those parleys were ill-timed and from a position of weakness. Now it has been proven correct, but in the garb of peace parleys, those elements which were allowed to cross over and take refuge here, again their support structure, their presence, their secret cells, all that apparatus needs to be mapped, and our whole national intelligence effort needs to be geared towards the identification of that support structure, those sleeper cells, and the intelligence-based operations and their efficacy, which is a function of essentially the correct intelligence, needs to be strengthened manifold. And at the same time, the capacity of the police needs to be built up at, on emergency basis, because police that takes the major brunt throughout Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and their capacity deficit, their leadership deficit now needs to be fully strengthened. And unless this civilian governance structure and civilian law enforcement in the shape of police is strengthened, the military's presence and the FC's presence would remain the only solution till the time this structure does not gain the proper strength. And in the long term, that is the only solution, because the military, if it stays indefinitely, it creates its own complication. It's very costly effort also, and we have to actually look at the right balance between how much of the military deployment, how much of FC deployment, and how much leverage and how much strength can be given to the civilian law enforcement agencies and the civil administration, so that those areas are properly governed, our borders are properly managed, and we take care of the areas ourselves. So instead of relying on Afghan Taliban's goodwill to rein in the TTP, I think we should look inwards more and strengthen our own counter-terrorism apparatus and our own governance mechanisms.
And thank you very much for raising such important points, Janjua Saab, and we'll try and explore them a bit further as well, because they're essential as we move forward and develop what sort of a way Pakistan needs to take with reference to this particular issue. And Dr. Ishtiaq, the factors when we talk about especially any sort of strategy that needs ahead is very important in terms of its continuity. And I understand it is said time and again that the military and civil leadership is on the same page, and of course there were important meetings and important platforms that have also reiterated the same within the country. But then of course there has also been issues such as that of parlays, as Dr. Janjua Sahab was referring to earlier, and he was of course also talking about the kind of policies that existed in or the kind of measures that were taken that allowed the regrouping of the TTP, and because of that of course we are now suffering, and there's this entire cycle of dealing with the activities within Pakistan again. How is it that we can ensure the continuity of the way forward in dealing with these terrorist organizations, and that irrespective of the political regime, that is what is followed?
Well, you see, whether in war or in terrorism, I think appeasement never works. You know, that's a lesson of history. And I think it was a grave mistake on the part of the previous government and its leadership in particular, that it tried to appease the Pakistani Taliban, and practically, you know, some of them were brought back, and there was a whole lot of politics, you know, of appeasement open publicly, negotiations aside. And I think that was a criminal act on the part of the government and its leadership to do so. But, you know, coming back to how to tackle the current situation, one is that in recent history we have a successful experiment. You know, we had taken a very effective counter-terrorism and counter-insurgent campaign, and we had really, you know, rid ourselves of TTP terrorism, you know, for some years until it came back to us. Second, it came back to us because the Americans lost the battle and left, just like they left in 1988-89, and then the region, Afghanistan, suffered in the, you know, the rest of the decade, and 9/11 takes place, they come back, and the second time they are abandoning the. So the second important difference, you know, apart from appeasement, as compared to the success that we have, that the weapons that Americans left behind on NATO forces, they are now in the hands of either the Afghan Taliban or TTP. And the reason we are suffering losses, or the, you know, this the campaign, the kind of campaign that we are facing this time, unlike a full-fledged insurgency, is because they have superior weaponry system, you know, in their hands. Thirdly, I think why, you know, this sudden spike, I was just wondering that Pakistan, having achieved 3 successes in the past 15 years or so since the political transition in April 2022, we are just getting close to another political transition, you know, from this current government to the caretaker government, which will obviously supervise the period leading up to the next elections. Thus transitions are always very difficult. And I think if we connect the political party that did the appeasement and this moment of transition, I think we need to establish some kind of linkages here as well. As far as the successes are concerned, compared to the early last year, you know, economically we are relatively stable now. Foreign policy, I think our foreign minister and the prime minister also, you know, they have gone around the world, attended meetings, and they have re-established the kind of niche that Pakistan has traditionally, you know, in the neighborhood as well as globally, with major countries and our trusted partners. And also overall, you know, beyond the economic and you know, foreign policy, politically also you can see that the kind of environment that we had, say, between April and November when the new army chief was appointed, there was total political turmoil. And I think that was the period when TTP, which was already, you know, appeased, and they had come back here, they came back with, and that is the period where insurgency, you know, gained momentum, in my opinion. Once the new army chief comes in, declares a policy of zero tolerance, and also gives a clear-cut message to India in the neighborhood that Pakistan will not compromise on any kind of threat, from across eastern or western frontiers. So here we are right now, going into a different regime, facing a renewed terrorist threat from Taliban. What should we do? As I stressed before, one is to strengthen our counter-insurgency, counter-terrorism, and especially intelligence-based operational capability, for which we have a grassroots CTD mechanism already in the tribal, ex-tribal areas. Second is, I think we have a very experienced diplomatically as well, and in terms of understanding of Afghanistan and its intricate politics and culture. The current special envoy, Ambassador Asif Durrani. I think we should benefit from his experience. He has already been to Kabul, and I think Sadiq Khan was equally, capable. But I think Asif Durrani will lead a very effective, Pakistan policy into Afghanistan, trying to convince the Afghan Taliban leadership that while relations, economic, political, cultural are important, it is time now they should deliver concrete outcomes in our security and foreign policy expectations. And those concrete outcomes should be beyond, like cosmetic measures. For instance, in the past 2 months or so, according to my humble knowledge, there have been some TTP members or leaders who have been shifted, from border regions to northern Afghanistan, just to give a message to Pakistan that we are doing something. Second is that all of these terrorist organizations which have taken shelter in Afghanistan, including Al-Qaeda, IMU and other, they are being jumbled into this Eastern Turkestan Islamic Party. And I suspect that, there is some kind of an American engagement with the Taliban regime as well, because Daesh is already, geared up against China, and creating this one single organization may be part of the grand, American-led design to sabotage Chinese interests in this part of the world. Well, that is some kind of a hunch that I have. Okay. But I think there are promising factors, and we should give due consideration to them as well in our analysis.
All right. Farrukh, I also want to focus on what Janjua Sahab earlier said in terms of the post-merger development. And when we focus on the issue of terrorism, there is, of course, a lot of emphasis on the way that we need to respond to terrorist activities or terrorist groups. But I also want to, of course, understand how we need to build upon the way forward in terms of the community and to ensure that the way that different terrorist groups have developed or gathered within the country is also something that the country is working on, and developing areas in parts of the country that, of course, need that sort of attention, and that can then prevent the influx of more terrorist groups within the country. Do you think that our plan of action includes that or not?
Right, and I think it is again a very important question, but I wanted to actually, before that, I wanted to go back to what
Sure.
Dr. Ishtiaq was talking about, especially Ambassador Durrani. I've known him as a friend and a benefactor of this program also. So I think that one thing I really appreciate about people is being clear-headedness. Their clear-headedness, their being clear-headed. So Ambassador Durrani has a very clear vision of how things should be, and I am really grateful to the authorities that he was appointed there. I hope that he continues to work, and I think that he can deliver humongous results. Having said that, now what you were saying and what Brigadier Janjua was earlier saying, Sana, it all comes down to two things, right? A choice between two things: what is right, and what is easy. We have been doing what is easy for past 50 years. And how is it so? When it comes to Afghanistan, our policy has constantly been crisis management, always trying to find short-term solutions for long-term problems. And that's why right now what we are talking about is that these benefits that we are getting, this access to Central Asia and other things, they are important, and they are because of Afghan Taliban. Remember, they are there today. Tomorrow there will be a bidder who will come and try to spoil the deal, and they will do it. The people who can oppress their own people in such a horrendous manner, who kept on attacking them for 20 years, do you think that they are going to be kinder to you? Earlier I was talking about this speech by Ajit Doval that was given somewhere in 2014 at the start of that. I kept on I transcribed the entire speech and I kept on quoting it in my columns. So it was hosted on YouTube page of a university called Shastra University. So after, perhaps because it was repeatedly being quoted, that university has removed that video. Now it is available on a website called Daily Motion, and I've recorded it privately as well. So if they are also going to remove it, I'm going to put it on my website, that is farrukh.net. Just watch it and see how India plans to influence these regions and try to actually put more pressure on Pakistan. I think that I'm not too much worried about America per se, because America seems to have outsourced most of its security concerns in the region to India, and it is essentially India that keeps, because it is obsessed about China and Pakistan, it keeps on investing too much. And I think in coming days what you're going to see is this tip that Dr. Saab was talking about, Turkestan Islamic Party, that is going to wreak havoc in the region. And Afghan Taliban either will not be able to stop them or will support them. So right now my concern, and by the way, a disclaimer, I don't speak for any government. I don't speak for any department, because I am just a journalist and a writer who keeps on analyzing. But because I've been researching and handling these issues for quite some time, it is my belief that whenever you're talking about any space, there has to be a reset button. If we have lost a reset button in Afghanistan, Sana, if there are no other options but Afghan Taliban, then we have to ask ourselves, why is it so? And is there a possibility that there might be someday a secular alternative to Afghan Taliban that might be more inclusive, that might be friendly towards all the regional partners? And if concern is regarding India's games that it keeps on playing in Afghanistan, remember, since Afghan Taliban took over, it has helped India in portraying Pakistan in further negative light, because in the Western media somehow Afghan Taliban are connected with our name. So India keeps on saying they see Pakistan is part of the problem, not the solution, despite the fact that we kept on sacrificing for 20 years. So if I'm going to talk to these people, that is TTP or Afghan Taliban, then I can even talk to India and other regional forces as well and convince them that we can work together holistically and for regional peace. If that is done someday, I think we'll move ahead. But right now what is happening in Afghanistan, I don't think that Afghan Taliban have proven at all that they are your friends.
All right. Thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you very much, Brigadier Janjua Sahab, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Ishtiaq, for being part of the discussion as well. There are, of course, a lot of aspects that have been highlighted in terms of what Pakistan needs to do in the fight against terrorism. But, of course, there's a lot that needs to be done inward as well, and for us to reflect on what sort of strategy needs to be put in place. And then there are many challenges that are there in terms of the Afghan Taliban regime as well, but it all depends on, of course, what sort of resolve exists and how Pakistan will be able to go ahead with the right decisions. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.